Welcome back to our channel. When Lee Jacob did testify against his Hollywood buddies, it was not because he detested communists. He was impoverished. His wife was sent to a psychiatric hospital. His passport was seized by the government. His children could not be fed. That's not even the most startling aspect, though. The well-known actor was actually never politically active. He was broken, tortured, and placed on a blacklist for a crime he didn't commit. This is the tale they wish to keep hidden from you. Lee J. Cobb was born Leo Jacoby on December 8, 1911, in the Lower East Side of New York City. He has Jewish immigrants for parents. Benjamin Jacob, his father, was a native of Russia. Kate Nelek Jacob was his Romanian mother. Families attempting to establish a future were crowded into the Lower East Side. It was crowded, noisy, and ambitious. His father was a compositor for the Yiddish newspaper, the Jewish Daily Forward, which assisted immigrants in maintaining ties to their heritage. Cobb's formative years were marked by hardship and diligence. One thing that stuck with him as a child was witnessing his parents overcome obstacles. That same roughness showed in his performances when he later acted. When he entered the entertainment industry, he altered his birth name, which had previously represented his ancestry. Many Jewish performers followed suit in an effort to escape the widespread prejudice in Hollywood. When Cobb was a child, his family relocated to the Bronx and settled on Wilkins Avenue, close to Crotona Park. It was a rapidly evolving Bronx. In its communities, immigrants from all over the world lived. Families could find a spot to escape the congested streets in Crotona Park. Although it was more than just work, his father's job paid a consistent salary. The Jewish Daily Forward gave those attempting to navigate America a voice and a link to their culture. Cobb was surrounded by these tales as a child, and they influenced his own acting style. Initially, it appeared like he may pursue a career in music. Cobb's remarkable ear for sound made him a violin prodigy. He was a harmonica player as well. Although he had genuine talent, his adolescent years were a turning point in his life. Suddenly, his aspirations to become a violinist were dashed when he shattered his wrist. Even though it was a heartbreaking moment, he was obliged to find anything else. His search prompted him to take action. He took a risk when he was 17. He fled to Los Angeles with the intention of succeeding in Hollywood. The film industry was expanding quickly, and thousands more aspirants were working toward the same goal. Cobb joined Bora Minowicz's Harmonica Rascals, a musical group, but it was very difficult to secure acting roles. He was forced to return to New York after struggling for a few years. He wasn't prepared to give up, but he was disappointed. He worked in radio dramas during the day and attended New York University for accounting lessons back home. His true interest was still performing, but he needed a fallback. Lee J. Cobb made a decision in 1935 that would alter the course of his life. In order to change American drama, he joined the group theater. This group, which was started in 1931 by Lee Strasberg, Cheryl Crawford, and Harold Clurman, avoided ostentatious entertainment in favor of telling honest, gritty tales about regular people. It was the center of socially oriented theater, and Cobb joined it at its height. Actors John Garfield, Stella Adler, and Elia Kazan, who would go on to become some of the biggest names in theater and cinema, were among his co-stars. The group theater was a movement rather than merely an acting exercise. The group supported highlighting actual social struggles through drama. The working class in particular. Instead than pursuing individual celebrity, they prioritized teamwork. Cobb's philosophy of acting was influenced by this method. He also learned about method acting, a style influenced by Konstantin Stanislavski. This technique forced performers to draw from their own feelings and experiences, giving shows a more authentic sense. His efforts with the group theater soon produced well-known shows. He appeared in Clifford Odets' hit play Waiting for Lefty in 1935 after it was written. It narrated the tale of a taxi driver's strike and defied convention by allowing the audience to participate in the demonstration. The Civic Repertory Theater's audience burst in cheers when it debuted on January 6, 1935. It was an uncommon accomplishment for the cast to earn 28 curtain calls that evening. Cobb was involved in a historic event while only having a voice role. After that, the production relocated to Broadway's Longacre Theater, where it attracted fervent audiences. Cobb as Mr. Carpin Golden Boy, another Odets play that addressed moral issues, ambition, and identity, 2 years later. The story of Joe Bonaparte was told in its 1937 debut. A violinist caught between his passion for music and the promise of boxing fame. In a Harold Clurman directed production, Cobb co-starred with Elia Kazan and John Garfield. Golden Boy resonated with viewers who were worried about America's sluggish Great Depression recovery. Cobb's emotional depth made his performance stand out, demonstrating his ability to add nuance to any part. Cobb debuted in Crime and Punishment on Broadway the same year. Based on the work by Fyodor Dostoevsky, the drama debuted at the Biltmore Theater on January 22, 1935. He portrayed a saloonkeeper named Coke in a production that attempted to capture the psychological depth of the book on stage. However, on February 6, 1935, it closed after only 15 performances, despite its lofty goals. The run wasn't long. For Cobb, however, it was a significant stride. Even at the young age of 24, he was already establishing himself as an actor who was not afraid to tackle challenging roles. A little part in Universal's science fiction serial The Vanishing Shadow in 1934 marked the beginning of Lee J. Cobb's Hollywood career. Among the early sci-fi devices that were introduced in the movie was what many consider to be the first handheld ray gun. Cobb had a modest beginning, but it was the beginning of a career that would span over 40 years. He began acting in low-budget westerns in 1937 while going by the name Lee Colt. Rustler's Valley, which was released on July 23, 1937 by Paramount Pictures, was one of them. Alongside William Boyd, better known as Hopalong Cassidy, he portrayed Cal Howard in a supporting role. George Gabby Hayes as well. For straightforward, action-packed plots, Hollywood turned to westerns, and Cobb was attempting to establish himself in this genre. The same year, he made appearances in North of the Rio Grande as well, but these parts did not make him a star. Cobb tried to suit the image of the tough cowboy with the name Lee Colt, but he didn't stay with it for long. He desired recognition as a serious performer. Giving up the stage moniker was his means of stepping up to something greater and not simply another face in B-movie westerns. That choice put him on the course that would shape his professional life. Following his Broadway success, he returned to Hollywood in 1939, marking his true breakthrough. In the adaptation of Clifford Odets' play, Golden Boy, he was cast. In the movie, William Holden played Joe Bonaparte. Music and boxing are conflicting for a young violinist. Cobb, who was only 7 years older than Holden, had to impersonate an older character in order to play his father, Mr. Bonaparte. This position was a game-changer. The film gained emotional weight from his portrayal of the troubled yet loving father. William Holden became a rising star once Golden Boy became a hit, while demonstrating Cobb's ability to add nuance to a supporting part. His acting technique had been influenced by his involvement in group theater, and now Hollywood was paying note. He moved on to more serious roles, and his days of playing little roles in westerns were over. Cobb's versatility as a role player became evident during the 1940s. In 1943, he starred in The Song of Bernadette, portraying Dr. Doses, a doubtful medical professional who gradually starts to accept the visions of young Bernadette Soubirous. Based on Franz Werfel's book, the movie was a huge hit. Cobb's performance gave a story centered on faith and doubt more depth, and it took home 4 Academy Awards at the 16th Academy Awards. In Anna and the King of Siam, he portrayed Kralahome, the Prime Minister of Siam, 3 years later. In 1946, Irene Dunn's character Anna Owens and Rex Harrison's character King Munket's cultural conflict was examined in the movie. Cobb's portrayal was notable for its understated authority, revealing a strong figure who was acutely conscious of his changing surroundings. The film was later turned into the well-known musical The King and I and took home 2 Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Cinematography. On February 10, 1949, Lee J. Cobb became a legend. New York City's Morosco Theater hosted the premiere of Death of a Salesman that evening. Cobb portrays Willie Loman, a salesperson who was drowning in failure. Under Elia Kazan's guidance, he became the character rather than merely acting. While watching a guy collapse before their own eyes, audiences sat in stunned silence. The play became an immediate hit. Cobb gave an honest and tragic performance. His intensity and desperation were the same every night. The theater's patrons were shaken. It was hailed by critics as one of Broadway's best shows ever. He received a nomination for a Tony Award, and his portrayal of Willie Loman set the norm for all subsequent actors in the part. The playwright, Arthur Miller, was in awe. The way Cobb viewed his own character was altered by his performance. He even changed some of the writing to better reflect Cobb's power and depth of feeling. "The most dramatic actor I've ever seen," he thereafter referred to him as. Together, they made Death of a Salesman one of the most potent dramas ever produced. From February 10, 1949, to November 18, 1950, 742 performances took place throughout the Broadway run. Cobb's delivery remained consistent in intensity from night to night. He never experienced burnout, unlike most actors. The drama earned several Tony Awards and the Pulitzer Prize. Because of its success, serious theater was shown to be both effective and lucrative. Cobb's impact continued after the episode ended. He played the part again in a 1966 television adaptation, ensuring that his iconic performance was maintained. Decades later, his Willy Loman is still the standard by which all others are judged. Playing powerful, authoritative characters on cinema was Lee J. Cobb's career. Behind the scenes, however, his life changed significantly. He became a member of New York's Group Theater in the 1930s, a collective that specialized in plays with social commentary. Many of its members had a left-leaning political inclination, being attracted to progressive causes like Marxism. Although Cobb was not very politically active, he shared the belief of many artists of the time that theater could be used to address social issues. That wasn't out of the ordinary back then. Many intellectuals believed that capitalism was a flawed system since millions of people were suffering during the Great Depression. However, when the nation began to fear communism in the 1940s and 1950s, those previous ties were harmful. Hollywood saw the full impact of the Red Scare. The House Un-American Activities Committee, or WAC, and Senator Joseph McCarthy began investigations to find alleged communists. Cobb was mentioned due to his affiliations with left-leaning artists such as Clifford Odets and his history with the Group Theater. John Garfield as well. In his 1951 WAC testimony, actor Larry Parks accused Cobb of having communist affiliations. That was all that was required. WAC did not require proof of communist activity. One only had to be accused to become a target. Cobb's collaborator on Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller, subsequently claimed that Cobb was never really political. As was typical throughout the 1930s, when the Soviet Union was viewed as a crucial ally against Hitler, he had sympathized with pro-Soviet and anti-Nazi parties. Nevertheless, WAC ignored those details once he classified someone as suspect. Cobb was being investigated, and his career was in jeopardy. Cobb's official summons to testify before WAC in 1951 made matters worse. "No," he said. "Neither will he cooperate or disclose names." It cost him everything. His blacklisting by Hollywood made it practically hard for him to get a job in television or movies. His passport was seized, eliminating his ability to work abroad. He was having a hard time supporting his family and was drowning in debt. Fearful of being linked to him, friends and co-workers avoided him. It was an isolated and hopeless period. Cobb remained silent for 2 years, declining to testify. By 1953, however, he had reached his breaking point. He was struggling financially, and his wife had been placed in an institution. He experienced a sense of helplessness. Finally, that year, he consented to go before WAC. Under duress, he listed 20 former Communist Party members, the majority of whom the committee already knew. Years later, he publicly discussed that decision. His return to work was made possible by the testimony, but it came at a high price. A lot of people in Hollywood believed that working with WAC was an unforgivable betrayal. Later, Arthur Miller described Cobb as more of a pitiful victim than a monster. Cobb made a political statement without naming names. It was what he had done to live. But for the remainder of his life, the guilt dogged him. Ironically, Cobb played in On the Waterfront in 1954, a movie that many people think supported the testimony of WAC witnesses, just a year later. Bud Schulberg wrote it, and Elia Kazan directed it, both of whom had given names as well. Marlon Brando played a dock worker in the movie who testifies against dishonest union bosses. Cobb portrayed Johnny Friendly, the dishonest boss. 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, were given to the movie. Although it was generally lauded, controversy arose because of its political message. It was widely perceived as Kazan's attempt to defend his own testimony before HUAC. Cobb's predicament was further compounded by his involvement with On the Waterfront. After testifying under duress, he starred in a movie that seemed to support the idea that testifying was the correct thing to do. He felt bad about what he had done, but it was too late. The careers of the people he listed suffered, as did his reputation and friendships. 3 years later, in 1957, Cobb had another iconic part in the film 12 Angry Men. He portrayed the third juror, who was the most combative and unyielding individual present. Cobb was the most formidable opponent to Henry Fonda's composed and logical juror number 8 in the movie, which focused on jury deliberations in a murder prosecution. The third juror was obnoxious and frightening, persistently imposing his views on others. but there was more going on behind his rage. His animosity stemmed from his own suffering, particularly from his strained bond with his son. A pivotal point in the movie was built up to. Juror number 3's steely facade began to crumble as the debate went on. He eventually broke down entirely as his emotions took over. He came to the realization that his wrath had always influenced his decision-making. Among the film's most impactful scenes was this one. Although Cobb never received an Oscar nomination for this role, many critics now consider it to be one of his best. As it gained popularity over time, 12 Angry Men is today regarded as one of the best movies ever produced. Cobb's performance was a key factor in its enduring influence. In 1958, he received a second Academy Award nomination for The Brothers Karamazov. He portrayed Fyodor Karamazov, the hedonistic and cunning father of a dysfunctional household in Russia. Fyodor was a self-centered, avaricious guy, yet Cobb gave him complexity. He was more than just an elderly crook, he was a representation of moral decline whose deeds precipitated a series of terrible occurrences. With Cobb at its core, the movie examined ethical and religious themes. The Brothers Karamazov was ranked among the best 10 films of 1958 by the National Board of Review, and his performance received widespread appreciation. Although reviews of the movie grew increasingly mixed over time, Cobb's performance was nevertheless hailed as one of its best features. Cobb was more than just a master of dramatics. He shone his versatility in a variety of roles. He played the role of Barak Ben Cannon, a Zionist leader battling for Israel's independence, in the 1960 film Exodus. His strong presence added to the role's potency. In the 1962 Western epic How the West Was Won, he portrayed Marshal Lou Ramsey. Then, in Our Man Flint, released in 1966, he stunned viewers with his comic abilities. He portrayed Cramden, a frustrated intelligence head in this parody of James Bond. The movie was well received by critics and consumers alike, demonstrating Cobb's ability to excel in supporting parts. With Lee J. Cobb, every function seemed more significant than it actually was. He distinguished himself by bringing a raw intensity to his performances on stage, in movies, and on television. One of the most admired actors of his era, he was known for his powerful voice, commanding presence, and capacity to display both strength and tenderness. Cobb could do anything, from Shakespearean tragedies to horror movies to westerns. On NBC's groundbreaking Western series, The Virginian, he played Judge Henry Garth in 1962. It was the first Western to be broadcast as a drama in 90 minutes, increasing its capacity for intricate narrative. The emphasis of the play, which was set in 1890s Wyoming and centered on life at Shiloh Ranch, was Cobb's character. Not only was Garth the owner of the ranch, he was a mentor, a father figure, and a guy whose judgments were taken seriously. Cobb handled him in a way that was both loving and harsh. Betsy, played by Roberta Shore, his adoptive daughter, viewed him as a kind but strict parent. As a leader, he was admired by the ranch hands, especially the Virginian. He wasn't merely there to issue directives. He took difficult decisions, resolved conflicts, and bore the weight of accountability. Garth considers his early days as a judge in Medicine Bow and deals with threats from the family of a convicted man in the episode The Judgment. Cobb demonstrated throughout his act that he was a man who was both strong and incredibly human. In order to make Garth feel genuine, he infused the part with emotion. The Virginian was at its height during his tenure. His performances were exceptional, and fans adored his presence. He performed one of his most intense parts and it tolls for thee. An angry ex-convict, played by Lee Marvin, kidnaps and tortures Garth. Cobb was pushed to the limit during the episode, and he succeeded. It was one of the most memorable episodes of the series because of his ability to convey both anguish and resiliency. Cobb departed from the show in 1966. It felt appropriate to write off his character. Judge Garth left Shiloh Ranch to take a position as Wyoming's governor. The series changed when he left. The Virginian lost a significant item without him. His participation had given the show a sense of realism and depth that was lacking in most westerns. Following his departure from television, Cobb landed one of his most well-known movie roles. He portrayed Lieutenant William Kinderman in The Exorcist in 1973. The movie, which received 10 Academy Award nominations and made nearly $441 million, became a global sensation. It was dramatic, frightening, and full of horror from the supernatural. Cobb's portrayal of Kinderman, however, gave the movie a genuine feel. The panic surrounding Reagan McNeil's possession did not engulf Kinderman. He worked as a detective, trying to figure out what was impossible. Kinderman looks into the death of film director Burke Dennings, who was discovered dead at the foot of a staircase with his head fully bent backward. He was portrayed by Cobb as a rational man. But he was still disturbed by what he witnessed. The Exorcist was as intense behind the scenes as she was on screen. William Friedkin, the director, challenged his actors to the edge and occasionally employed drastic techniques to get responses. Even without notice, he discharged firearms on the set. Special effects in the movie were innovative for their day. Reagan generated the unsettling noise of his head spinning around in a circle by pressing a cracked leather pocketbook up against a microphone. But Cobb's performance was the most notable of all the technical accomplishments. He brought the terror to life. Before his death in 1976, one of his final significant performances was in The Exorcist. The movie became a legend, spawning prequels, sequels, and many imitations. Cobb's portrayal of Kinderman is still regarded as one of the movie's most realistic performances. He was giving the terror a sense of realism rather than only responding to it. Additionally, Cobb's career took an unexpected turn in the early 1970s. He starred in Polizio Tesci, a series of crime thrillers from Italy. The political turmoil of the era was mirrored in these violent, gloomy movies. Cobb developed a niche in the genre during this time, when American performers frequently played parts in European motion pictures. His portrayal of a mafia boss embroiled in a lethal power struggle in Cross-Shot, 1976, was his most well-known performance. The style of these movies was more intense than that of American noir. Corruption, violent shootouts, and explosive vehicle chases pervaded each scene. Cobb was ideal for the position. He stood out even in a cast of actors. Cross-Shot, his last movie, came out after his passing. It demonstrated his commitment to keep pushing himself creatively, even though it wasn't as well known as his Hollywood work. He was taking on new tasks even in his final years, demonstrating his ability to rule any genre. Cobb had an interest outside of movies and TV shows. Theater in real time. He played one of the hardest parts in Shakespeare's King Lear in 1968. With 72 performances at the time, it was the longest-running King Lear on Broadway. Cobb, 56, portrayed the elderly monarch with a blend of strength and sorrow. His performance was passionate, emotional, and unvarnished. Shakespeare's King Lear is among his most challenging plays. It's complicated and gloomy, and a performer must give it their all. Cobb produced. He gave Lear a sense of realism by showing a guy losing control of what he had previously mastered. Given the political and social turmoil of the late 1960s, audiences were able to relate to the play's themes of betrayal and power. It has never been common to see King Lear staged on Broadway. The final significant production prior to Cobb's performance was Orson Welles' 1956 work. The next would not be until 2004, when Christopher Plummer assumed the position. The importance of Cobb's accomplishment is evident from that alone. Lee J. Cobb experienced both success and adversity in his life. He wed Yiddish theater and cinema actress Helen Beverly in 1940. Julie Cobb, who subsequently became an actress, was one of their 2 children. Events beyond their control, however, put their marriage to the test. Cobb faced communist accusations during the McCarthy era. He was placed on a blacklist in 1951 following his name being mentioned in testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee. The pressure was too much to take, and he was surrounded by suspicion and fear. The tension caused their marriage to fail by 1952. His personal life almost fell apart due to the political persecution. Cobb later acknowledged that Helen had terrible hardships during this period. She was placed in an institution due to the strain of the investigations. He felt imprisoned in the meantime. His finances and emotions were exhausted by the government's constant pressure. In his 1953 WAC testimony, he mentioned 20 former members of the Communist Party. Later on, he defended his choice by saying it was an act of survival, something he sincerely regretted but felt was essential for his family. Cobb wed Mary Hirsch, a schoolteacher, in 1957. The stability he had lost was restored by this marriage. With the 2 children they had, he now had 4. Mary gave him some comfort despite the harm the Red Scare had done to his personal and professional life. However, years of hardship and stress had taken their toll. At the age of 64, Cobb passed away in Woodland Hills, California, on February 11, 1976, from a heart attack. Several prominent members of the Jewish community were buried in Mount Sinai Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, where he was buried. Despite his difficult career, he made indisputable contributions to theater and cinema. He received a posthumous induction into the American Theater Hall of Fame in 1981. He continues to provide one of the most impactful performances in Broadway history as Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman. His legacy endures.